The invisible habit that controls you. There's something most people never question, not because it's hidden, but because it feels normal. It happens in conversations, in arguments, in silence. It's the automatic need to respond. Someone says something, you react. Someone ignores you, you feel something. Someone challenges you, you defend yourself. And all of this feels natural, but what if it isn't? What if this constant need to react is not a sign of authenticity, but a pattern you've been conditioned to follow? Think about it. How many times have you replied instantly, not because you wanted to, but because it felt like you had to? A message, a comment, a tone of voice. Something triggers you. And before you even realize it, you're already involved, already explaining, already defending, already giving away your energy. And the strange part is, most of this happens without awareness. It's almost like your reactions are not entirely yours. They've been shaped over time by expectations, by past experiences, by the silent pressure to be understood, accepted, or respected. So you react, again and again, and slowly, without noticing, you become predictable. People learn you. They know what will upset you. They know how to get a response from you. They know how to pull you into situations you never intended to be part of, not because they are controlling you directly, but because your reactions are. This is where most people lose something they don't even realize they had. Control. Not control over others, but control over themselves. Because the moment your reaction becomes automatic, it stops being a choice. And when it's no longer a choice, it can be influenced. That's the quiet shift, the one no one talks about. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it leads to a question most people avoid: what would happen if you didn't react at all? Why people expect your reaction? At some point, without you realizing it, people started learning you, not in a conscious way, not like they sat down and studied your behavior. It happened slowly, through repetition. Every time you reacted the same way, every time you explained yourself, every time you felt the need to respond, you were teaching others what to expect from you. And expectation is powerful. Because once someone knows how you're likely to react, they don't need to control you directly anymore. They just need to trigger you. Think about that for a moment. It's not always about manipulation in a dramatic sense. Most of the time it's subtle. A certain tone, a delayed reply, a specific comment. Small things that create predictable reactions. And the more consistent your reactions are, the easier it becomes for others to navigate you, not necessarily with bad intentions. Sometimes it's just human nature. We all adapt to patterns. But here's where it becomes a problem. When your emotional responses become expected, they start to lose value. If you always explain yourself, your words carry less weight. If you always react quickly, your presence feels constant, and therefore less noticed. If you always engage, your absence stops being meaningful. And slowly, without anyone saying it out loud, your reactions stop being respected and start being assumed. That's the shift. You're no longer being experienced, you're being predicted. And when someone can predict you, they can position themselves around you. They know when to push. They know when to wait. They know when you'll come back. Not because they control you, but because your pattern does. This is why some people feel stuck in the same dynamics, again and again, with different people. The faces change, the situations look different, but the outcome feels familiar, because the pattern hasn't changed. And as long as the pattern stays the same, so does the response it creates in others, which leads to something most people never consider. Maybe the problem isn't what people are doing, but what they've learned to expect from you. And if that's true, then the real shift doesn't start with them. It starts with what happens the moment you choose not to respond the way you always have. The power of emotional withdrawal. There's a moment that changes everything. It doesn't look dramatic. No one notices it right away. There's no announcement. It's quiet. It's the moment you feel the impulse to react and choose not to. At first it feels strange, almost unnatural, because your mind is still trying to follow the old pattern. It wants to reply. It wants to explain. It wants to correct, defend, justify. But you pause. And in that pause, something shifts. Not outside, inside. For the first time, your reaction is no longer automatic. It becomes a decision. And that changes everything, because emotional withdrawal is often misunderstood. People think it means being cold, distant, disconnected. But that's not what it is. It's not about shutting down, it's about stepping back, creating space between what happens and how you respond to it. That space is where control lives. Most people never develop it. They move from trigger to reaction instantly, like a reflex. But when you stop doing that, you interrupt the entire pattern. And this is where it gets interesting, because the moment you stop reacting the same way, the dynamic begins to break. Not because you said something powerful, but because you didn't. Silence, when it's intentional, is not weakness. It's information. It signals that something has changed, that you are no longer operating under the same rules. And people feel that, even if they don't understand it consciously. They notice the delay, the absence, the lack of the reaction they expected. And that creates uncertainty, because what they were used to is no longer there. But here's the part no one tells you. This phase can feel uncomfortable. You might question yourself. You might feel like you're losing something, like you're not being heard. But in reality, you're just not giving your energy away as easily as before. You're no longer reacting out of habit. You're choosing. And that's the beginning of a different kind of presence. One that doesn't rely on constant expression, but on controlled response. And once that shift happens, people don't just hear you differently. They start to feel you differently. What happens when you go silent? At first, people don't understand what changed, they just feel it. Something is different. You're still there, you're still present, but you're not responding the same way, and that's when the shift begins. Because when you stop reacting, you remove something others were unconsciously relying on, your predictability, before they knew what to expect. A quick reply, an emotional response, an explanation. Now, there's a gap, and that gap creates tension. Not loud tension, not conflict, something quieter, uncertainty. They might read your message again. They might replay the last conversation in their mind. They might even start questioning themselves. Did something change? Did I say something wrong? Why didn't they respond like before? And here's the important part. You didn't do anything aggressive. You didn't confront. You didn't withdraw completely. You simply didn't react the way you used to. And that alone is enough to alter the dynamic, because people are not only influenced by what you say, they're influenced by what you don't say, by what you don't give. Attention, energy, immediate access. When those things are always available, they become invisible. But the moment they are reduced, and even slightly, they become noticeable, valuable. And this is where perception starts to change. Not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because you're no longer easy to read, no longer easy to reach emotionally, and that creates a different kind of presence. One that doesn't chase attention, but naturally attracts it. But again, this isn't about control over others. It's about what happens when you stop being controlled by your own impulses, when you're no longer reacting out of pressure, but responding from awareness. And people feel that difference, even if they can't explain it. They adjust. Some become more attentive, some become more cautious, some become distant. And that's part of the process, because when you change your pattern, you don't just change how people see you, you reveal how they were relating to you all along. The discomfort of becoming unpredictable. This is where most people give up, not because the change isn't working, but because it feels uncomfortable. When you stop reacting the way you used to, you don't just change how others see you, you change how you see yourself. And that can be unsettling. There's a strange silence that comes with it. You notice things you didn't notice before. You feel the urge to respond, but you hold it. And in that space, doubts start to appear. Am I being too distant? Am I losing connection? Should I just go back to how I was? Because reacting is familiar, it gives a sense of movement, of control, even if that control was never really yours. But when you pause, when you don't immediately step in, you're left with something most people try to avoid: awareness. You begin to see how often you were responding out of habit, not intention, how many times you spoke just to fill silence, how often you explained yourself without being asked. And that realization can feel uncomfortable, not because something is wrong, but because something is finally clear. And clarity doesn't always feel good at first. It removes the illusion that everything was under control, but at the same time it gives you something real. Choice. For the first time, you can decide, is this worth my energy? Is this worth my response? Is this even necessary? And sometimes, the answer is no. Not out of pride, not out of ego, but out of alignment. You're no longer reacting just to maintain a connection. You're choosing whether that connection deserves your response, and that's a very different place to operate from. Still, it's not easy. There will be moments where you feel misunderstood, moments where silence feels heavier than words, but that's part of the transition. You're moving from automatic reactions to intentional presence. And in that process, you're not just becoming less predictable to others, you're becoming more honest with yourself. The new identity. Someone hard to control. At some point, something settles, the noise becomes quieter, the urgency fades, and what once felt difficult starts to feel natural. You're no longer fighting the impulse to react. You're simply not controlled by it anymore. And that changes how you move through everything. Conversations feel different, silence feels different, even tension feels different, because now there's space. Space to observe, space to choose, space to not engage when engagement isn't necessary. And people notice, not always consciously, not always immediately, but they feel it. There's something about you that's no longer easy to define. You don't respond the way they expect. You don't give energy the way you used to. You don't explain yourself as often, and that creates a different kind of presence, one that isn't loud, but is felt. Not because you're trying to be distant, but because you're no longer available in the same way. And that doesn't push people away. It filters them. Those who were only connected to your reactions and start to fade. Those who value your presence start to meet you differently, with more awareness, with more respect. Because now, your attention is not automatic, it's intentional. And anything that is intentional carries weight. But here's the most important part. This isn't about becoming cold or detached from everything. It's about becoming selective, about knowing that not every situation deserves your reaction, not every word deserves your response, not every moment deserves your energy. And when you understand that, you stop trying to control how others behave. You focus on something far more powerful, how you respond, or whether you respond at all. And that's where real control begins, quiet, unseen, but undeniable. So the next time you feel the urge to react instantly, pause, just for a moment, and ask yourself, is this a reaction or a choice? Because that moment, and small as it seems, might be the one that changes everything.